Okay. Good afternoon. Thanks for coming, and I appreciate your being on time. It's always a nice courtesy as a presenter to have an audience that is ready to go. Hopefully I will respect your time and be ready to end when the time allotment has finished. The focus for the day is writing in science. Next slide, please. Sort of a quandary for us because most of us did not receive adequate preparation during college or from their school districts in how to use writing to support student learning. If the goals of Common Core state standards are to be met, teacher education programs, school systems, and state departments of education must do a better job, especially in math and science. And this quote comes from Gillespie in a recent article published just last year. And that hopefully will be the gist of my presentation, is how can we be better prepared to facilitate Common Core state standards, and especially writing as a way of learning in the content areas. Next slide, please. If we are not prepared, if we don't get proper training, then why bother? Next slide, please. Writing amplifies education in many ways. It increases learning by itself. It does provide a way to be aligned with Common Core state standards. It broadens student learning, making things more deep and more permanent in their brains. And also, writing allows us to diversify and differentiate in a way that will meet the needs of all the student learners in our classroom. Next slide, please. On a personal level, as a science teacher, you do not have to go out and get a degree in literature. You do not have to spend hours and hours searching through the Common Core state standards for vertical and horizontal alignment things. There are a lot of things that you can do. Thing number one is something that we already do already, and that's to make the whole environment an environment of learning, an environment of writing, an environment of learning, an environment where we have a purpose to be in the classroom, whether it's science or writing. The next thing that we can do is pay a little bit of attention to Common Core state standards. You don't need to become the expert, but you should be familiar, especially with the vertical alignment. How are students supposed to progress from the very remedial levels of Common Core state standards up through the development into the college and career ready endpoint? One of the main things, again, this is what we do already, is broaden skills for students, give them many opportunities and many chances to increase their powers in both writing and, of course, content areas. Oops, missed a cue, sorry. Understand science writing specifically. Just like narrative and expository are different, science writing does have specific components that teachers need to be aware of. And this would be true for any of the disciplines. Historians and mathematicians would have a different way of writing, a different way of presenting information than do science people. Next slide. Know lots of things to do. Have a toolbox which is well equipped, and again, this is something we're already in the process of doing, many different tools to use. And finally, ask for help. Don't feel like you're alone in the boat. Figure out who knows how to teach writing, figure out who's able to meet the standards, figure out who's a good teacher, and go see them for additional help. Next slide, please. Back to the classroom environment. If you could flip through the whole slide, get one more thing. Again, conducive to learning, be friendly, be learning focused. Provide kids that they can all move forward no matter where they are, no matter where they're coming from, no matter what their goals. They should be growing and learning just as we're growing and learning. Science writing. Make your environment learner-friendly, writer-friendly, student-friendly. Offer frequent practice. Frequent practice could be something simple like journal rights at the beginning and the end. Have them write an imaginary postcard after a lesson to explain what they learned to an imaginary friend. They could write diary entries as if they were the creator of the scientific fact. Any kind of writing will be helpful. Collaborative. Let them talk to each other, let them dialogue, let them discuss in order that they can have better practice and bounce their ideas off each other. And of course, the alignment standard again. Next slide, please. Robust writing instruction. And go ahead and flip up all 5. Thank you. Writing should not just be writing for the sake of writing. It should be writing for the sake of instruction. It should be goal-oriented. One of the key tools to make writing a better learning tool is to have students think about writing. Have them explain where their ideas came from, have them defend their writing, have them be self-critical. If they read aloud, they can find their own mistakes, and have them be reflective. What were they trying to do, and then did they meet the goal in order to get what they were trying to do done? Next slide, please. Good quality writing would also involve regular steps that you might learn from your English teacher. Good writing involves planning. Graphic organizers are a common tool used in the district. Hopefully you're learning a way to bridge the gap between the organizer and the actual writing samples. Lots of mnemonic devices are available. You could teach them how to pick an idea, organize an idea, and then write it. Use the mnemonic POW. Pick, organize, write. If you're working on argumentative writing, a mnemonic like TREE, pick a topic, choose your reasons, explain and elaborate. But there are lots of tools available to help organize well-developed writing that meets the demands of the prompts and is also evidence-based. Next slide, please. Oh, there it is. Thank you. Finally, good solid writing geared to a specific audience. Science writing is very different. Science writing is very precise. It's multimodal. Lots of times in science, you're referring to a data chart and then back to text, or you're referring to a graphic and then back to text, or you're looking at a lab and then back to text. So students need to have practice juggling these different ways of learning and looking at things. This is emphasized in the report from Newell, Vanderhyde, and Wilson that was presented in the textbook that we've been using for our classwork. Sometimes with science writing, it's helpful to begin with the end in mind. What is the end goal that the student has or the teacher has? And then the students can scaffold backwards from the final product, incorporating things in a way that makes the final product stand alone. Next slide, please. Science-specific writing is very unique. It's not expository, and it's not narrative, it's not opinion-filled, and it is data-filled. So students need to understand this difference. Next slide, please. And this one has 3 subtexts. Science writing needs to be content-rich. Students need to understand the vocabulary in order to show genuine understanding of the topic. They need to have a science structure where all the supporting details are providing further proof for the topic at hand. And it's not an interpretation event. Science writing is almost always objective and explanatory, not a chance to offer, yes, this is how I feel, yes, this is what I think, yes, this is anything except what the data shows. Next slide, please. Because of its specific nature, science writing also involves a lot of content reading and vocabulary. All the words in science have their own meanings, many of which have a different meaning in regular language. So it's important that students understand how the vocabulary is specific. It's recommended that science teachers use fewer words and go into greater depth with the few words that they've chosen in order to extend content as well as to encourage writing in the class. Play with the words, dissect the words, pull them apart, hear them, say them, see how they're applied in different environments. All of these things make it very useful and make it more meaningful to students. A quote from Flint says, "Word knowledge makes it possible to engage and talk about text." And this is exceedingly important in science, where again, all the vocabulary words are unique to their own environment. Next slide, please. Thank you. Because of its nature, science is evidence-based, so students need to understand how to extract evidence from sources, recommending that the students annotate while they read. In a textbook, you can always use Post-it notes if you don't want the students actually writing in the book. They need to understand how to support claims. Going back to a point we made earlier, sometimes it's better to start with the end in mind and have them work backwards to find evidence that meets the end goal, instead of starting with an introduction, start with their conclusion and then work backwards. So, just an idea. And this, of course, is in alignment with Common Core State Standards, which has so many standards, anchored standards, and EL's OLE standards about reading and writing. Next slide, please. And before we close, a couple of things that can be useful. Number one, Make sure that you are not reinventing the wheel. There's tons of good stuff out there. There's tons of good teachers out there, and don't feel like you have to invent your own thing. It's best if you start with things that are working for other people and try to just tweak them a little bit so they match science content areas instead of feeling like you have to go out and make up all your own stuff. That's ridiculous. One of the best tools that I've read about is called using mentor text. Supply the students with good information, whether it's an article from Newsweek or an article from National Review or an article from Popular Mechanics. Give those students mentor texts that talk about ideas in science and help them to learn how to pull apart the text in order to see what good science writing looks like. They can identify techniques that are used. They can refer to a huge variety of texts. They can see summaries. They can see collaborative writings. They can see inquiry activities. They can see models and use those as a basis for their conversation. Next slide, please. Again, something we already do already. Sorry, bad grammar. Something that we all already know how to do well is give feedback that matters to kids. Make sure that it's ongoing, that it references exactly the topic that is in front of them, that it comes in many different phases of the development of the product, et cetera, et cetera. This is reiterated by Jago in her work in the reading and literacy teachers. Another tool that is very useful is known as power writing. English language arts teachers are famous for this. Brief, timed writings. Good quote, write as much as you can, as well as you can for a certain amount of time, and that comes from Fisher and Fry. Kids will think while they write, so any writing they do related to the topic will allow them to increase fluency and become more fluid with the topic at hand. Also, power writing provides us teachers with an immediate assessment tool. We can just look down to see if they're understanding it. We can look at their writing to see if there's any misconceptions, and then we can address those right away. And to close, I'll talk about what does all this mean for us. Seems like a lot of information in a very short amount of time, so I will try to move quickly through the last few minutes. First of all, the big deal in our district right now is alignment, and if we are writing in our content areas, it does support the Common Core state standards. Of course, all of the reading standards and all of the writing standards would be supported by any sort of reading or writing that you're doing in the content areas. But specifically, as a teacher, it allows you to see where are the kids right now, where you want them to go, and then you can build the bridge between where you are and where they need to be with less effort. Lots of content in science is supported by evidence, and this is an anchor standard that appears twice in both reading and language arts. It allows students to comprehend complex text, interpret words as used, and allow them to use real text in order to provide their own opinions, their own evidence-based documents. Perhaps more important than alignment, next slide please, is that writing is a great tool for students to actually learn with. Writing is not just a time filler. When used appropriately, it is a great way to increase content understanding. If you can mesh the two, content and writing, it really, really does improve understanding and allows students to have a greater recall and greater depth of understanding with the information that they have in front of them. As a teacher, the big question is assessment. What do you do with all this writing? Well, there's lots of options. You don't necessarily have to do anything with the writing by its own nature. Writing is a valuable tool in class. You don't have to feel obligated to go over every piece of writing that they create. Perhaps you could pick a few tasks to look for each time you provide a writing sample. Have they connected the three main points? Have they offered a correct point of view? Have they provided supporting evidence? Rubrics, excellent tool. If you're going to be grading an assignment, make sure the students have a rubric ahead of time. That way they know and you know exactly what you're going to be looking for. Use the writing as a formative. As mentioned earlier, you can just take a quick glance at the writing to see if the students are getting the main idea, if there are any misconceptions or things of that nature. Or sometimes you just want the kids to write for the sake of writing. Give them more practice with fluency, more practice of creating their own evidence-based project or things like that. So lots of things to do in the assessment area. Overall, the main deal is that Better writing increases learning. If they're writing well, it allows them to learn better. Next slide, please. And finally, in closing, next slide, please. Be cognizant of your classroom environment. Practice teaching writing a lot. Include real content when you're teaching writing. Make sure that your writing is tailored to your content area. Equip yourself with effective tools, and be careful with what and how you choose to assess. So hopefully I've offered you some new information about writing in the content areas. Anyone have any questions? Round of applause. If you have any questions, you're welcome to email me. Thank you, Ms. Taylor, for being my video technician. Thank you, audience.
Thank you.